All right, guys, we are back, and today we're really taking a look at Wilson's 14 points. What we're going to find is that in the midst of World War I, this war has been raging for years, since 1914. And Germany is going to find itself in a position where it's the last of its allies that are still standing. The Ottoman Empire has surrendered and fallen. The Austro-Hungarian Empire has surrendered and fallen. So Germany really is the last of its alliance. And it really is defeated, but it will not surrender. It's national pride being what it was. We know nationalism was one of the causes of the war, and they are unwilling to surrender as long as there is any chance for victory, and they're going to hold out as long as they possibly can. So what we're going to see is that Wilson creates this plan for peace. He calls it his 14 points. And it's really aimed at not only ending the war, but really trying to address the causes of war so that we can prevent future wars. If you remember from a previous video, he really talks about the fact that in selling it to the American people, we're fighting this war that could be the war to end all wars. And that was the way he really wants to end it, is by making it the war to end all wars, to put something into place that prevents this from happening again. So we're going to take a look at the 14 points. The first point really deals with no more secret alliances. And so I'm going to zoom in here on this map, because what it really does in a roundabout way is it shows the alliances, at least the major ones, and how they're all interconnected. Now, it does leave out a lot of the minor alliances or loyalties, but what we're going to see is that they were creating all these secret alliances. And when you do something in secret, when you do something in the shadows, when you don't want it to come out and be known, it looks like it's pretty shady business. And so anytime you do anything that you're trying to keep secret, it's going to cause suspicion by others. So he says, no more secret alliances. If you're going to have a treaty, if you're going to have an alliance with somebody, do it in the full sunlight of the day, right? Make sure that it's above board and everybody knows what's going on, because it's far less threatening. It's far less suspicious when you do it that way. No more secret alliances. Now, point number 2 really deals with the freedom of the seas. And as Americans, we love the idea of free trade and freedom of the seas. Nobody controls the oceans. Nobody owns the oceans. They're really something that should be for international use. And so we are looking at this point. It's really directed in large part at Germany and the use of unrestricted submarine warfare. That really had a terribly dampening effect on trade, on travel. And so we're looking at this going, no, everybody has access. Everybody has to be able to move around freely. So we want to make sure that that is installed in international law. Point number 2 is no more unrestricted submarine warfare. We want freedom of the seas. The next thing that we're going to see is aimed at the elimination of tariffs, getting rid of trade barriers and boosting economic ties. And the reason for this is because the more economic ties you have with a country, the more likely you are to find a diplomatic solution to your problems. If your economy is tied to the economy of another country, it's not very wise to go to war with that country. And so the more we can be economically kind of codependent on each other, the more trade there is, the more interaction there is between these different countries, the more likely it will be that we'll find a diplomatic solution. So that's really what point 3 is all about, increasing economic ties. Now, point number 4 is the reduction in arms. Again, if you go back to the video that deals with the causes of war, one of those causes is militarism. It was one of the main causes of World War I. And so if we can get everybody to reduce their arms down to a more acceptable level, we're not saying that you shouldn't be able to defend yourself. We're simply saying nobody needs an army of millions and millions and millions of men, right? If you have a big army, you may be tempted to use that big army for something other than just defense. So a reduction in arms aimed at one of the main causes of war. Again, we're trying to really prevent future wars here. Point 5 is the adjustment of colonial claims. Now, this is aimed again at another one of those causes of war, that imperialism. The colonial claims, we had to adjust those borders because there was so much conflict, so much tension between countries that were competing for colonial territory and mineral rights and all the natural resources that was contained in these colonial holdings, that we had to kind of make sure that we got this right, and we redrew those boundaries accordingly. And then the rest of the points, point 6 through 13, are adjusting of international borders. So much land exchanged hands in this war that we had to kind of put things right and redraw the map. We're going to kind of carve out areas for other ethnic groups to create their own countries. We're going to redraw the boundaries and give land back to the countries from whom it was taken, and so forth. So points 6 through 13 are just about redrawing the map of Europe in a way that makes maybe a little bit more logical sense. Now, the 14th point, and maybe the most important point, especially in the mind of Woodrow Wilson, is the creation of the League of Nations. Now, the League of Nations was supposed to be this international body that could prevent war through diplomacy. If 2 or 3 or 4 countries have a serious issue with one another, then instead of going straight to war, they can bring it before the League of Nations and have a place specifically designed for diplomacy to prevail. Other countries can kind of weigh in on things. And so the idea here was kind of an international governing body. And so this is really the predecessor of what we have today of the United Nations. But the League of Nations was really, in many ways, ineffective. And it was ineffective because, it was ineffective because the United States never joins this thing. Even though it was created, it was the brainchild of Woodrow Wilson. He can't convince the American public to join, and because of that, it really weakens this organization. The organization also has no way of making any of its determinations stick. They can make a ruling, but they have no army to enforce it. They have no way of really doing that. So it's a good first step. It's an important thing as we look back in history, but it was probably doomed to failure for those reasons. Now, the 14 points, really some things are important that are not in the 14 points. That is, there's no blame. It never says you are to blame for the war and we were the innocent victim. There's no blame. There's also no punitive actions. Because there's no blame, there's no way to say, well, you owe this much money and you have to pay reparations. And so the reality here is that World War I had plenty of blame to go around on all sides. And so it was no one country's fault. It was no one alliance's fault. It was just one of those things that got out of hand really fast, in part because of the alliance system. And so he's trying to allow countries to be able to save face, to maintain at least some semblance of national pride by not being told by the international community that you caused the war and now you owe this. To that point, it also has no admission of defeat. So the Germans, who are clearly on the losing side of this war, they don't have to sign anything that says, yes, we surrender. It was our fault. We owe X amount of money. And so the Germans are really going to ask for peace on Wilson's 14 points. It's the only document that comes out that the Germans can swallow, that make them feel good about ending the war. So when they agree to the 14 points or to a treaty based on the 14 points, Germany is going to enter into an armistice. Now, an armistice is a temporary ceasefire. During that time, they can work out a lasting peace. So they're going to call a temporary ceasefire in order to work out a lasting peace that should, according to Germany, be based on the 14 points. We're going to find out that it's not as simple as that. And so please make sure that you go ahead and watch the next video that I've got coming out on the Treaty of Versailles. Until then, I hope you learned something. I hope this was at least somewhat entertaining and informative. Make sure that you go ahead and subscribe and leave me any comments. I'd love to hear from you guys. Thanks for watching.